The warm summer air hummed with the buzz of a crowded city as I stepped into the apartment building, my heart pounding against my ribcage. Tonight, the atmosphere felt different, charged, almost electric. I clutched the bottle of wine I'd brought, a peace offering for the host of the evening, my boyfriend's older sister. She'd always been magnetic, her presence dominating any room she entered. From the moment I met her, she had this way of making you feel both seen and small. Her confidence wasn't just evident, it was a weapon she wielded effortlessly. Jake, my boyfriend, had been unusually quiet about tonight's gathering. It was rare for his sister to invite us over, and he hadn't given me much to go on, just that it would be a night to remember. As we climbed the steps to her apartment, I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling of curiosity, paired with a flicker of unease. The door swung open before Jake could knock. She stood there, framed by the dim light of the hallway. Her green eyes flicked over me, then to Jake, a smirk tugging at her lips. "You're late," she said, her voice low and teasing. Jake chuckled nervously. "Traffic." "Always an excuse," she replied smoothly, stepping aside to let us in. Her apartment was immaculate yet inviting. Soft jazz played in the background, and candles lined the surfaces, their flickering flames casting hypnotic shadows on the walls. The air was tinged with the faint scent of sandalwood, grounding yet intoxicating. "Make yourselves comfortable," she said, motioning to the living room. I sank into the plush leather couch, my fingers tracing the seams absent-mindedly. Jake leaned against the armrest beside me, his posture unusually stiff. "What's the occasion?" I asked, trying to fill the silence. Her sister's smile widened as she poured wine into 3 glasses, her movements unhurried. "No occasion. Just thought it'd be nice to get to know each other better." She handed me a glass, her fingers grazing mine for a moment longer than necessary. "You've been with Jake for a while now. I figured it's time we had a little family bonding." The way she said bonding sent a shiver down my spine. Jake cleared his throat. "We're happy to be here." Her gaze lingered on him, sharp and probing, before sliding back to me. "I've always liked how polite you are. But there's no need for that tonight. We're all friends here." I nodded, taking a sip of wine to steady my nerves. It was rich and heavy, warming me from the inside out. Her sister sat across from us, her legs crossed, her posture casual yet commanding. She tilted her head, studying me like a predator sizing up its prey. "Tell me something," she said, her voice soft but insistent. "What do you think makes Jake such a great boyfriend?" The question caught me off guard. Well, he's kind, thoughtful. He listens." I glanced at Jake, who gave me a small, encouraging smile. "Is that all?" she asked, her tone laced with amusement. I hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I mean, there's more, of course. He's supportive, loyal." "Loyal," she repeated, leaning forward slightly. "That's a big word. Do you think you're loyal, Jake?" Jake's jaw tightened. "What's that supposed to mean?" She shrugged, swirling her wine glass lazily. "Just making conversation." The tension in the room thickened, and I felt caught in the middle of something unspoken. Her sister's smile never wavered, but there was a challenge in her eyes, a subtle push and pull that left me feeling off balance. "Let's play a game," she said suddenly, her tone bright and disarming. "What kind of game?" I asked hesitantly. Her smile widened. "A trust game. It'll be fun. I promise." Jake shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know if—" "Relax, little brother," she interrupted, her voice smooth as silk. "It's nothing crazy. Just a way to see how well you two know each other." Her gaze locked onto mine, and for a moment, I felt like the only person in the room. "You trust him, don't you?" "Of course," I said, the words coming out more defensive than I intended. "Good," she said, setting her wine glass down with a decisive clink. "Then let's get started." She stood, her movements fluid, and crossed the room to a sleek cabinet. She opened it, pulling out a silk scarf and holding it up for us to see. First, a blindfold. Jake stiffened beside me. "What are you doing?" "Relax," she said again, her tone firm but not unkind. "It's just a game." She approached me, the scarf dangling from her fingers. "May I?" I hesitated, glancing at Jake, who looked as unsure as I felt. But there was something about her presence, magnetic, unyielding, that made it impossible to refuse. Slowly, I nodded. She tied the scarf around my eyes, the fabric soft against my skin, plunging me into darkness. My other senses heightened immediately, the faint rustle of fabric, the scent of her perfume, the sound of her steady breathing. "Can you see?" she asked, her voice close to my ear. "No," I whispered. "Good." Her hands brushed my shoulders, guiding me to stand. I heard Jake protest faintly, but her voice silenced him. "Trust me, Jake. I know what I'm doing." Her touch was both reassuring and commanding as she led me to the center of the room. My heart raced, a mix of excitement and apprehension thrumming through me. "You're in good hands," she murmured, her lips so close I could feel her breath against my cheek. And that was how it began. "Spread your legs wider," she commanded, her voice a low, husky whisper that sent shivers down my spine. I obeyed, my breath hitching as I adjusted my position on the bed, my back arching involuntarily. The cool leather of the strap-on pressed against my entrance, and I bit my lip to stifle a gasp. She's so confident, I thought, watching her move with predatory grace. So in control. Her fingers slipped between my thighs, coaxing me open with firm, deliberate strokes. "You like this, don't you?" she murmured, her voice dripping with amusement. "You like being under me?" I didn't answer, too consumed by the sensation of anticipation pooling low in my belly. My boyfriend's sister, her sister, was the one dominating me tonight, and the thrill of it was almost unbearable. The fact that we were doing this in a downtown apartment, hidden away from everyone we knew, only heightened the forbidden allure of it all. Her hands moved to my hips, gripping them tightly as she positioned herself above me. "Relax," she said softly, though there was nothing soft about the way she pushed forward, breaching me in one smooth motion. I cried out, both from the sting and the rush of pleasure that followed, my nails digging into the sheets beneath me. "Good girl," she praised, her tone laced with satisfaction. She started moving, slow and steady at first, but soon picking up speed. Each thrust was deliberate, calculated, driving me closer and closer to the edge. "You're so tight for me," she whispered, leaning down to brush a strand of hair from my face. "Does it feel good, being taken like this?" I could barely form words, my mind racing with a mix of shame and exhilaration. "Why yes," I managed, my voice trembling. Her grip on my hips tightened, and she pulled me flush against her, her chest pressing against my back as she continued to pound into me. The sound of the door creaking open interrupted our rhythm, and I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. "What the?" came a familiar voice, sharp and disbelieving. It was him. My boyfriend. Her sister paused instantly, pulling out of me as if nothing had happened. "Surprise," she said nonchalantly, her tone dripping with irony. She turned to face him, in perfect order, as if everything were under her control. I sat up, grabbing the sheet to cover myself, my cheeks burning with embarrassment. But before I could say anything, her sister leaned over me, her hand brushing against my cheek. "Don't stop now," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "We're not done yet." My boyfriend stared at us, his expression a mix of shock and anger. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, his voice rising. "You two, you're having fun," her sister finished for him with a smirk. "Isn't that what you wanted? An open relationship?" He looked at me then, his eyes searching mine for answers. "Is this what you do when I'm not around?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost hurt. I opened my mouth to respond, but her sister cut me off. "She's been exploring," she said smoothly, her tone dismissive. "And I've been helping her." She leaned down, pressing a light kiss to my forehead. "Haven't we, sweetheart?" I couldn't speak, too overwhelmed by the situation. My boyfriend's eyes narrowed, clearly trying to process what he was seeing. "This isn't what I meant," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "No." Her sister raised an eyebrow, challenging him. "Then what did you mean, exactly?" He didn't have an answer, his gaze flickering between us. For a moment, the room fell silent, the tension palpable. And then, unexpectedly, her sister stepped back, removing the strap-on and tossing it aside. "Fine," she said, her voice shifting. "If you can't handle it, then why don't you join us?" My boyfriend blinked, clearly caught off guard by the suggestion. "What?" "You heard me," she said, her tone daring him to refuse. "Unless you're afraid?" He hesitated, his eyes darting between her and me. And then slowly, he began to undress, his movements deliberate and calculated. My heart raced as I watched him, the situation spiraling in ways I never could have imagined. Her sister smiled, a knowing glint in her eyes. "That's more like it," she said, stepping aside to give him room. "Now, let's see how you handle it." The silence was suffocating as the three of us sat across from one another in the dimly lit living room. Her sister lounged casually in an armchair, her confidence radiating from every movement, while my boyfriend, Jake, perched on the edge of the couch, his hands gripping his knees so tightly that his knuckles turned white. I was seated beside him, caught in a whirlwind of guilt, confusion, and lingering desire. No one spoke at first, the weight of what had just transpired hanging heavily in the air. The flickering candlelight only seemed to highlight the tension, casting long shadows on the walls. Jake broke the silence, his voice low and strained. "What the hell just happened back there?" Her sister tilted her head, a sly smile playing on her lips. "What do you mean?" she asked, feigning innocence. "You know exactly what I mean," Jake snapped, his tone sharp. "I walk in on that, on you too, and you act like it's no big deal?" She leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on her knees. "It was no big deal," she said, her voice calm but edged with challenge. "We were exploring. Pushing boundaries. Isn't that what you wanted when you started talking about experimenting?" Jake's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" she countered smoothly, leaning back again and crossing her legs. Her composure was maddening, as though she held all the power in the room. I could feel Jake's gaze on me then, piercing and searching. "And you," he said, his voice softer but still laced with disbelief. "Why didn't you stop it? Why didn't you tell me this was happening?" I opened my mouth, struggling to find the right words. I didn't plan for this to happen," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "It just did." Her sister chuckled softly, the sound almost condescending. "See? No harm, no foul. We're all adults here, aren't we?" Jake shot her a glare. "You don't get to brush this off like it's nothing." "Then don't," she said, her tone turning serious. She stood and walked over to Jake, her towering presence forcing him to look up at her. "Make it something. Step up. Be part of it, instead of standing there like you don't know what you want." The room seemed to grow smaller as her words hung in the air. I could see the conflict in Jake's eyes, the war between his anger and something else, curiosity, maybe even desire. "You've always liked control, haven't you?" she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Always needed to call the shots. But have you ever let go, Jake? Have you ever let someone else take the reins?" Jake swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing as he processed her words. "Don't answer now," she said, stepping back and flashing a wicked smile. "Think about it. I'll leave you two alone to debrief." She sauntered out of the room, leaving Jake and me in an uncomfortable silence. After a long pause, Jake exhaled deeply and ran a hand through his hair. "I don't even know where to start," he muttered. "Neither do I admitted, my voice trembling. Jake looked at me then, his eyes softening slightly. "Do you want this? All of this?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "It's new. It's intense. And I'm scared of what it means." His gaze lingered on mine, and for the first time that night, I saw something other than anger. There was vulnerability there, a crack in the armor he always wore. "Maybe we should figure it out together," he said finally, his voice quiet but steady. I nodded, unsure of what the next step would be, but certain that we couldn't go back to how things were. Whatever had been unleashed tonight was impossible to ignore, and the path forward would require us to confront parts of ourselves we had long kept hidden. In the distance, I could hear her sister humming softly, her presence a constant reminder of the chaos she had introduced into our lives. And despite everything, I couldn't help but feel a spark of anticipation for what lay ahead. In the days following that night, the tension between Jake, his sister, and me remained palpable. The once straightforward dynamics of our relationship had been replaced with an intricate web of emotions, betrayal, curiosity, and an undeniable pull towards something none of us fully understood. Jake avoided his sister at first, refusing to engage with her attempts at casual conversation. But she was unrelenting, always finding ways to needle him, to challenge his boundaries. Her presence in the apartment became a constant reminder of what had transpired, but it also forced us to confront the emotions we had buried. One night, after another tense silence during dinner, Jake slammed his fork down. "Enough," he said, his voice firm. "If we're going to deal with this, let's stop tiptoeing around it." His sister smirked, leaning back in her chair. "Finally," she said, her tone dripping with amusement. "I was beginning to think you'd never grow a backbone." Jake's jaw clenched, but he didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he turned to me. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice softer now, more vulnerable. Do you want to keep whatever this is going? The weight of his question settled over me. I hesitated, the truth gnawing at me. I don't know, I admitted. But I think we owe it to ourselves to figure it out. Together. His sister's eyes sparkled with intrigue. And that, she said, is where the fun begins. What followed was an uneasy truce. We set boundaries, or tried to, and agreed to explore the dynamics between us with open communication. Her sister, ever the instigator, pushed us to confront our fears and desires. She became a mirror, reflecting the insecurities Jake and I had long ignored in our relationship. Jake, who had always prided himself on being the one in control, began to let go. He allowed himself to be vulnerable, to explore sides of himself he had suppressed. And in doing so, he discovered a new depth to his connection with me. We began to have conversations we had avoided for years, about our fears, our needs, and our dreams. For me, the journey was one of self-discovery. Her sister forced me to confront parts of myself I had buried, desires I had ignored out of fear of judgment. With her, I felt seen in a way I never had before, and it was both terrifying and exhilarating. But the delicate balance we had created couldn't last forever. One night, during a particularly heated argument, Jake lashed out. "This isn't a relationship anymore," he said, his voice shaking. "It's a game. And I don't even know the rules." Her sister, unbothered by his outburst, simply smiled. "The only rule is honesty," she said. "Something you've never been good at." Jake turned to me, his eyes pleading. "Do you even want to be with me anymore? Or is this just about her now?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I realized then that I couldn't keep straddling the line between them. I had to make a choice, not just between them, but between the life I had always known and the one I was being drawn toward. In the end, I chose myself. I told Jake and his sister that I needed space to figure out who I was outside of them. The whirlwind of emotions, the tangled relationships, it was all too much. I packed a bag and left the apartment, unsure of where I was going but certain that I needed to find clarity. For weeks, I stayed with a friend, focusing on rebuilding my sense of self. I went to therapy, journaled, and reflected on the choices that had brought me to this point. And slowly, I began to understand what I wanted: authenticity, connection, and a relationship built on trust. When I finally returned, things had changed. Jake and his sister had mended their fractured relationship, though the tension between them lingered. I sat them both down and explained what I had learned about myself. "I can't go back to the way things were," I said. "But I also can't continue like this. If we're going to move forward, it has to be as equals, with clear boundaries and mutual respect." Jake nodded, his expression solemn. "I want to try," he said. "I don't want to lose you." Her sister, surprisingly, seemed subdued. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think you're stronger than either of us gave you credit for."